Okay, I want to show you a map, a very specific map. This one. Have a look at what I found on this map. Well, this map, along with just a few others, a handful of others, contains a really curious feature. All of these lines, these earthworks, they seem to make no sense on their position. Labelled in some cases as cross dykes, and on this map, they're in their scores. They seem to dissect ridgeways, outcrops, curious landforms, and then they seem to just stop when you least expect it. But the most curious thing about these random lines on this map, well, is we seem to have a number of different theories as to what these were used for. Now, general accepted consensus, big sweeping statement, is these are pre the written word, they're pre-Roman. But scholars have suggested multiple different theories: boundaries of land, defensive structures, a deterrent, a routeway now lost to time through the plough. Now, back in 2016, R.J. Brewer did a non-invasive survey of these structures, and he found hundreds. Especially in the Wessex landscape. Here, he gave us our first clue which flew in the face of my initial idea. He found that many of these were exactly where you wouldn't expect to find them, where you wouldn't be building a defensive wall. Oh, despite the fact he suggests that they weren't built to be as a deterrent, he suggests that they were built to be seen, to be very clear in the landscape. So to my mind, if these weren't defensive, well, why are you going to so much trouble to build these lines in the landscape? Welcome to the Wessex landscape, and welcome to the mystery of the cross dyke. Okay, really important drove road right across the ridge here, Shaftesbury Drove Road. Now come and have a look in the hedge just here. Okay, just through these trees. Here we go, here we go. Right, not very clear to see, but we'll try and get down low and show you where we have a ditch that runs down that way, a bank, and a ditch I'm sat in right now, goes off down the slope, goes back in the other direction, across, cuts across the ridgeway just there, over, well, at least 2,000 years old. We'll find out more very soon. And then there's also this. And here, you can't see it on this ridge, but it cuts across this ridge. Spin the camera around this way, you'll see what I can see here, which is this big old ditch, bank either side, heading off down the slope. Now it cuts across the ridgeway that I was just walking on, and let's try spinning the camera out again. You're not going to see this one because it's been in a ploughed field, but nevertheless we do have some earthworks. The map shows it better, cuts across this ridgeway very nicely, bank, ditch in the middle. If we zoom out on a map and mark all of these in this area, there are loads, all seemingly on different parts of this landscape. So let's do just that. Let's focus on the ones in this area. Can these give us any kind of definitive clues as to the purpose of these structures? Now let's flip back to that map again, because you might have already seen something of huge importance: settlement. Now, in this context, this could mean anything from the Bronze Age to medieval, but little research tells us that R.C. Clay came here in the 1920s and did some groundbreaking work at the time: archaeology with vibrations. He used a method of tapping the ground to listen to changes in the vibrations, and therefore determined stuff. He found a whole bunch of pits with Iron Age sort of occupation associated with them, and we still have some earthworks we can see from the sky now, and we can see them mapped as well, and he even drew them at the time, and they all sort of match each other up. We have what looks like an Iron Age Hillfort type construction here, so Iron Age settlement, tick. Well, this all adds up rather nicely. We have an Iron Age Hillfort type settlement here with these really odd earthworks. So we should probably conclude that these dykes are just additional defensive strategies for their settlements and their hill forts, and perhaps when the ridges are less steep, well, they're cutting across those for the same reason. Also, the big question for me right now is, why don't we see these sort of cross dykes and ditches all across Iron Age Britain? Why just up here on the chalk? The answer might just be 2 miles in that direction. So these features marked as cross dykes on the maps, well, what features do they lie on specifically? We don't see them all across the country. They're in very specific places. So I decided to map as many as I possibly could. What features do they lie on that we can help interpret them? Okay, well I made some notes and wrote them down of where I found them. Major concentration specifically on the central Wessex chalk. And across the south we have the South Downs, we have Sussex, and we also have a sporadic few in the Cotswolds and Shropshire. So the key factor here seems to be ridgeways with chalk. Now that's not to say that every ridgeway with chalk has them, but if we do find them, they're nearly always on ridgeways with chalk. Well now, if we seemingly assume that these dykes again were defensive, especially for the Hillfort behind us, well with these two dykes in question, well we seem to have an issue to address. Okay, so just through the trees there we have Chiselbury Hillfort. Really beautiful, really spectacular, we'll go and take a look. But let's note something, as I've walked along this ridgeway to get here, a couple of miles now, well, we've crossed no cross dykes, no what we perceived last time with the other Hillfort. So what exactly is going on here? Have I got this completely wrong? Okay, so this is a Hillfort by proper definition. Univalent Hillfort, which really looks like a Hillfort. Big old bank, big ditch, and a counterscarp. Okay, there is Chiselbury Hillfort. We'll have a look in there in a minute, but before we do, really important feature or two to discuss, because it turns out we do have cross dykes, just not where you'd expect them along that ridge. Instead, have a look at this. Look at that huge valley down there. Well, believe it or not, heading perpendicular again to the ridge, down that slope, it's like a 1-in-1 slope. Down there we have a cross dyke, and if that wasn't enough for you, right on the other side of the Hillfort we've got another one, again heading down the slope. Huge descent there. So what exactly is going on here? Absolutely not in a defensive position whatsoever. So what exactly is going on with these two, and what was their purpose? So I started to look into what archaeology had been done here at this site. Now, first of all, back at the original settlement I was at 2 miles down the ridge where we started, R.C. Clay and his vibrations, remember those? Well, it turns out a more recent study to find those pits that he discussed, well, it turns out they're not concluded to be any kind of occupation there at all. In fact, it got even more interesting back there. They found evidence of smelting, ironworking, Bronze Age work and pottery manufacture, and get this, they even found a lot of evidence of continental trading. So are we just seeing a manufacturing site back at the enclosure a couple of miles down the ridgeway, or the Hillfort, whatever it was? But how does that explain the cross dykes, and how, more importantly, does it explain the really weird position of the cross dykes here at Chiselbury Hillfort? Okay, well here's where things get interesting, a little bit weird, but also really interesting. Let's start to move away metaphorically from the Hillfort and the settlement just down the ridge there. And let's start to look at these cross dyke features in a very different way. Now, when Brewitt did that study in 2016, the results were truly staggering. Now, he surveyed 54 cross dykes within this area, 54, and they all conformed to exactly the same rules. Now, if like me you keep on thinking, because I do, defensive, some way they're protecting the ridge, they're protecting these sites, well, instead of that we have this. Rule 1. Chalk has layers, different types of chalk. Seaford on top, not always present, Lewis chalk and then new pit chalk. The ends of the dykes are always on the down slope where a fracture in the Lewis chalk sits on top of the new pit chalk. Rule 2. The cross dykes are never random. They sit on fractures in the Lewis chalk or follow fractures that run perpendicular, hence the cross. Well, that's incredibly bizarre. The geology seems to make a difference on the position of those dykes. Now, the remainder of the rules are physical features. I'll list them all just here. Okay, with all that in mind, I'm probably more confused now than when I started. Those rules are great. We seemingly have not defensive, we seemingly have cutting into a chalk in a very specific way. I think there's one more thing we could help with, which would be the dating of these features. Dating these is essentially not easy. Well, despite searching considerably, we don't really have many sort of radiocarbon dates for these cross dykes in the Wessex area. We seem to be able to date them broadly in the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, but that's seemingly done so by association. So that dating by association, well, that always tends to give us the same results, the same era wherever we take those associations from. So roughly 2,800 years ago, maybe 3,000 years ago, thereabouts, it seemed that this landscape up here on the Wessex Chalk, and maybe other places too, was specifically designed. But what exactly for? To draw an absolute conclusion as to what these were for right now would be wrong. We don't have any real contextual evidence from these to say, well, we found this, therefore we can conclude that they were for this. One thing we can say for sure is they were simply a linear earthwork, but maybe that would be a bit boring if we just stopped there, so let's have a go. During the late Bronze Age, roughly 1400 to 800 BCE, the chalk downs were no longer empty. Communities were starting to grow, fields were spreading, and as a competition for graving intensified, well, societies across Britain began marking boundaries in the land. Not a border or a boundary, but more of a statement of control, not a defensive line, not something that was splitting Britain up into tribal areas, but perhaps instead more like a filter or a threshold that you could cross, but it's a statement that you have crossed that line. Well, for me, a layman for sure, I kind of feel like these cross dykes, well, these are almost like the first fingerprints on our landscape that are sort of dividing things up into parcels of land, maybe land use in some way. Are we looking at the moment society began to draw lines, literally to manage herds, people, identity? Well, you're not just walking through this ancient landscape seeing all these different things that are up here. You're almost walking on the lines that somebody drew 2, 3, 4,000 years ago through their parcels of land, through their divisions of land. Someone who looked out across the same skyline, someone who felt the same wind on their face and decided that this was the place where the boundary should be. And I love that. Well, the people that built those cross dykes and other things that they would go on to build in that late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, well, the decisions they made then still shape how we see and experience the landscape today. And the greatest reveal of all, the prehistoric landscape is certainly still here, not always as a set of ruins that you can see and experience, but always a set of rules.